Hello, and welcome back to Beth's Naughty Reads. I'm Beth LaMontagne, and I hope you guys are ready to get super duper dirty as we look at Katerina St. Clair's Father Forgive Me book today. Before we get into that, I just would like to remind you guys to please take a moment and subscribe and like so that you get a notification of when these new episodes are out, as well as take a second to check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You can find me under Beth's Naughty Reads. I'd really appreciate the follow and support. It helps a lot. So, like I said, today we're going to look at Katerina St. Clair's Father Forgive Me. And I think you have a picture, honey, of the author. Nope, that's the book. There you go. So Katerina is a best-selling international author. She specializes in fantasy, dark romance, and dystopia type environments. She is fairly new. I think I read somewhere she's only been an indie author for about 1.5 years. So she is just starting to leave her mark on the I guess romance industry, if you will. And take a second to tell you a little bit about Father Forgive Me. And now you can put that picture up, honey. Fabulous job. Thank you so much for all your hard work. So, Father Forgive Me. This was another recommendation I received via Instagram from Brittany Faulkner, who I also know outside of Beth's Naughty Reads. And she said this book, she couldn't put it down and that I had to check it out. So guess what I did? I checked it out. This is book 1 in the Shadow of Darkness universe. There's a total of 3 books. It's definitely a dark romance. I've read some dark books, but I have not read anything quite this dark. There are extensive trigger warnings at the beginning of this book. And I'm just going to tell you the big ones for me, because there are quite a lot. There's sex trafficking in this book for both children and adults. There's some blood play, which I've had blood play before, but this one literally stopped me in my tracks because I was like, ew. It's also, if you're a devoted Catholic or Christian, this might be a book that's hard for you to get through, because it does impact, he's a priest. It's a forbidden love. And so it does impact, my whole thing was, because I am a Christian, I just kept saying once I was completely done with the book, I would pray for forgiveness at that time instead of doing it after every chapter. So let's get into the characters a little bit. We'll start with, why are you shaking your head? No, was that silly? It was true. Like, sometimes I felt when I got done reading, I was like, woof, I might need to say a prayer.
It's a book.
It's a it's
a book.
I know, but
it's kind of like somebody asking for forgiveness after they've, gone out to the internet and looked some naughty pictures.
Anyways, this is just, it's to fine point that it can be tough. Some of the reviews I read did say that people struggled with it because they were devout Catholics. So, the main characters, our main female character is Eden Faulkner. She is a 20-year-old college student. She has suddenly returned home from school due to a trauma that has occurred while she was away. Nobody knows at the beginning of this book what it was. She hasn't shared with anyone why she came home or how she's dealing with the trauma. She did grow up in Idlewood. They don't give you a town per se other than the Rocky Mountains. So in my head, I just kept picturing like a mountain-esque version of like Breckenridge, but call it Idlewood. She is very close. So she once had very, unwavering devotion to the Catholic Church and her family. However, as things start to occur when she was younger, she began to kind of see that not all the lines lined up, if you will. So that's why she went away to college, because she wanted to get away from her tyrannical father. The male main character, his name is Father Roman Breyer. He is the new priest for St. Michael Church. He is replacing a long-tenured priest who they call Father Kevin. Roman doesn't per se look like your typical priest. He very much looks like a bad boy. He has a tattoo that runs up his neck, and you can tell just by looking at him that it runs down his body. When he's not in his church clothes, he dresses like a hipster, which is very unusual for priests. And the minute that Father Kevin introduces him to the parishioners, like, the women instantly are drooling over him and making a big deal about it, to the point where their husbands in the book are scolding them, telling them to look away and that they're sinning by longing for him so badly. He did have a separate life before becoming a priest that probably drove him a little bit into the priesthood. He was active duty and did see a lot of war and death. And so that is probably what drove him a little bit to change his lifestyle. I will tell you that there's instant chemistry between Eden and Roman the minute they meet. And then they do spend a lot of time trying to maneuver their relationship, the forbiddenness of it, also what they're uncovering of the dirty secrets of the town, her parents, their parents' friends. It's just, it's a lot for them to handle. So they're really trying to maneuver their way through the book. I will say that the storyline opens with Eden coming home from school, getting ready to go to church, and their family goes religiously every Sunday. Since returning from school, Eden is disillusioned, or she is now disillusioned of her perfect family, friends, and little town, kind of like I mentioned. Now that she's seeing what she didn't see before, and it's making her bitter and angry and kind of questioning her religion. To deal with both the trauma of what happened to her at school and also what's happening in her home and community, she has turned to cutting. And I don't know if you guys know what that is, but a lot of people, when they are dealing with stuff, will cut themselves, and it's supposed to help with, like, it's supposed to be like almost like a bloodletting to help with pain, like an avenue out to deal with some of the stress and pain. The journey, like I said, is them trying to maneuver between that, his longing for her, and the dirty things that are happening in their town. I wanted to share with you guys some of my favorite parts of the book. I'm going to start with their meet cute. I don't know if you can really call it a meet cute, because I don't know that there's anything cute in this book, but this is their meet cute. When Eden goes to confession, she likes to make stuff up just to shock Father Kevin. She has shared with him before that she's been involved with orgies, that she has stolen things, that she's done meth. Like, she just tries to really build herself in a bad way because she likes to see his reaction. At the beginning of this, they're getting ready to go into church, and she decides that she's going to go and confess her sins. And much to her surprise, that is where Roman is. It's usually Father Kevin. Now it's Roman. And she's a little taken aback by him, but even more embarrassed because he knows who she is. And Father Kevin has shared with him all her sins that she's previously asked for confession, which I guess in the Catholic community, baby, tell me, is a no, no, no. Those are supposed to be private and not shared. Well, Father Kevin has shared them. Let's see. So when they are talking, she says, is he ready to judge her because he knows all this stuff about her that she's supposedly done? And he's very sarcastically, because he can see through the facade, says, he has nothing but empathy for an orgy-loving meth junkie. And so those are some of the few words that he said to her. They keep talking and going back and forth about, like, religion and who he is and what she's done. And at the end of the conversation, Roman says to Eden, "What I see is a girl who opens her mouth before thinking far too much." He moves closer to her and says, "You'd benefit from learning how to close those lips of yours. Maybe try focusing all that emotional energy you're spitting out on something more rewarding." And in my head, it automatically, like, I think he's talking about his dick, y'all. I think he's talking about her wrapping her mouth to shut her up around his dick. And so it's obviously, in my mind, very dirty and probably a little inappropriate for a priest to say within the first 5 minutes of meeting somebody. So like I mentioned, Eden's secret is that she's cutting herself, and nobody knows yet. Her brother suspects something. So her brother Aiden suspects something, but she refused to talk about it. So after service on Sunday, he asks her to drive him and his friends up to this lookout so that they can go smoke weed. She does take them up there, and amongst the dialogue happening, one of their friends, Zach, which unbeknownst to her, has been made a bet to see if he could find out what was going on underneath her sweater. And in a turn of events, he ends up ripping her sweater off. You can see the cuts. You can see claw marks going down her waist. You can just tell that her body is tattered and torn and abused. And so they make fun of her for that. And then they steal her car and leave her at the site. So, of course, it starts raining ridiculously, right? She's wearing a tank top. She has no sweater. She is walking herself home. And that's where she runs into Roman. And he finds her and learns at this point, because he starts asking questions about the Mars and the marks and the cuts, about what happened to her while she was away at school, and why, asks if that's why she's cutting herself for relief. As they're talking, he begins to take her home. And when they turn into her neighborhood, he stops a few blocks before her house. They're talking about how cutting doesn't help, and she sarcastically asks for alternatives. Suddenly, he tells her to lay back, and when she doesn't listen, he does it for her. So they're sitting in his car, and he's now reclined her seat. He then puts her hands on his stomach and urges her, says to her, you asked for different ways to release some stress. Well, now he's urging her to play with herself while saying confession prayers. So when she begins playing with himself, and I know I was telling this part to Greg, and he was like, hot damn, that's a lot. While she's playing with herself, he adds his fingers to the mix and says to her, finish your prayers while my fingers are buried inside you. At this point, he's basically also, once they're all done with this and she has climaxed and she has finished saying her communion prayers or her confessional prayers, he basically is making a claim on her, saying that now he's touched her, no one's allowed to touch her. I am not Catholic, but after reading that scene, I have never wanted to be Catholic so bad in my life. I have no idea why.
No.
But it was a hot scene. It was a hot scene.
No.
Stop. You sound like a broken record. All right, moving on. So Eden's relationship with her dad is very strained, and he just thinks she is defiling herself, full of sin, and needs to get back on track with Jesus and God. And the way to do that is A, to beat her, which is wrong, but B, to also sign her up as a altar server and have Father Roman work with Eden so that she can begin seeing the error of her ways. So this is the first time that Eden is coming to do her work. I guess they're preparing for a service in the middle of the week, and she has put on her altar server robe, but she is conveniently, wink, wink, not put any clothes on underneath it. So she's just in her chones. As they're talking and they're arguing, he tells her to derobe, tells her to take her clothes off and to sit in his lap. So they're doing this. There's some things going on between them. There's some conversations going about how wrong this is. And she sees his gold ring. So he does wear a gold ring that initially when she saw it, she thought he was married, but now she's begun to realize that that's a sign of his commitment to God. And asks him if that ring is what's keeping him from touching her, and then tells him to take it off. She says, take it off and touch me. And he just says, Eden, your demons want me, Father. I tap the ring, then take off the ring and sin. You can always ask for forgiveness later. And the scene is all kinds of wrong, because not only is he a priest, but they're doing it at the church altar. So like they're sitting in the middle of the church where they like do communion and stuff, and they're getting naughty and nasty. But it was really good. Those are just a few of the scenes. You guys, the sex between these two for a while just starts, it feels like really dirty. It is hot, but I think it's because it's dirty and wrong that makes some of the heat happen. But if you can handle a priest having sex, it's pretty steamy. Did you have something you wanted to add? Okay. So a couple reviews. I pulled 3. So this first one is from Abby Hall. She says, this book was steamy, and I don't mean just like a little bit. We're talking full on delicious tension that had me fanning myself. The forbidden romance vibe, chef's kiss. It was so well done. The whole priest falling for someone thing is a classic trope, but St. Clair made it feel fresh and exciting. The characters were complex, and I was genuinely invested in their messy, complicated relationship. I was actually rooting for them. So another one, this is from Marin Alessa. She says, yes, I am definitely a smut for a good priest book. Check triggers for sure, and if you are religious, especially Catholic, wow. I'd approach carefully. I was raised Catholic, and my grandmoms would be killing me if they knew I was reading this. LOL. I'm not a heavily religious person anymore. Blah, 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 blah. So she just goes on to say, there is some blasphemy, but it doesn't offend her because she's not as religious as she used to be. So again, kind of like a warning. This last one I really liked because it's from the UK, from Abigail in the UK. It says, Roman Breyer would have me at church every day of the week. The instant chemistry and initial interaction between Roman and Eden had me hooked. The character development and backstories were detailed. I loved a good internal conflict with characters and the switch in perspective. I did find some moments where things in a timescale seemed to progress rather quickly, but it made sense to map out the story too. The trigger warnings are no joke. Again, another warning about the trigger warnings. There's a very dark aspect to this story, which can be tough to think about, but believe me, it's worth it. Curious and excited to see what Katerina has in store for book 2. So as you guys can tell, the trigger warnings are definitely no joke. Take them seriously when you read this book. I don't know that I've ever said that before, but I will continue to preface that with this book. I gave it a 5-star, a 5 jalapeno rating. Dang, dude, the dirty talk is legit. It was really steamy and hot, and even like the forbidden stuff, because forbidden stuff is automatically hot on its own, but it all just played out really well and made for some great smut, if you will. Babe, can you play the video I had up there? This was found on Katerina's Instagram, and I thought it was hilarious. So I would share it.
Wow! That she's got.
And what's so funny is that was me a couple times. I'd like have to walk away from the book and I'd just be fanning myself, and it was hilarious. I would give the story rating probably like 3.5 stars. There were a couple times, like somebody mentioned, that some stuff I didn't make sense to me and I didn't understand why it was happening. But you kind of needed it to get to the end of the story. So, it just took a little bit longer to get through the story. My thoughts on the book: I definitely recommend the book, with a caveat that it's very dark and heavy. Be prepared to be shocked a little bit. There were several times, even though I knew the triggers, I literally was aghast. I would find myself needing to take some breaks from the book every once in a while, to take some breaks to color or play Royal Kingdom to kind of lighten up the mood, because it did get very dark and despair a couple times. I'm definitely gonna read book 2, so it wasn't dark enough to scare me away. And book 2 is called Teacher's Pet, and it's a forbidden professor-student relationship. So I can't wait. I don't know when I'm gonna do that, but it's on my TBR now. So I will also encourage you guys to go check out Lauren's social media. You can find her on Instagram as Your Local Writers with a Z. You can find her on TikTok as Katerina St. Clair Author, and on Facebook just as Katerina St. Clair. Go follow her, check it out, check out what else she has to offer. One thing I neglected to say, and I can't believe I forgot this, because thinking about her social media, her Instagram, these books have pictures, y'all. I'm not talking like just pretty character pictures. Like, they are reenacting some scenes, and they are hot AF. There's some where he bullies somebody a little bit, and there's a picture of that because he's protecting her. There are, like, in this book alone, there are 6 pictures that depict some of these scenes. And I mean, one of them is when he's whacking off and they've put a crucifix in front of his monster hog so that it's not just blatantly out there, but you can tell what it is, y'all. And it's the author's great. It kind of helped that spice a little bit. I've never had a book where there are actually pictures in it. I know a lot of hardback books have that, but it was nice to see that happening for ebooks. So Katerina, thank you for adding those in there. I don't know what I'm going to read next, but I will keep you guys posted. And I will end by saying, if you guys didn't get a chance to check out The Bar Is Open, see the hat, check us out if you're up for a laugh. Not dark and heavy, but really silly and ridiculous sometimes. Go check us out. It's Greg, my husband, and I. My husband Greg, and I. And it's called The Bar Is Open with Beth and Greg. So thank you guys for joining today, and we'll see you soon.